It is, again, just incredibly easy to caricature the U.S. as uninterested or worse, having some kind of malign interest in the region. And I've been looking at African social media discussions pretty intently for several years as part of a book project. And, you know, the Russians, they too have their own influence campaigns that are very, very popular. And the messages are, you can see why the messages would be appealing. The messages are about respect for African lives and sovereignty. They're about addressing the frustration that African countries are rich in resources and yet people can't find jobs. Having an absence of both straight reporting and clear messaging about what the U.S. is trying to achieve, there's then just a vacuum. And there we are with adversaries quite busily filling it.
Thank you. Mr. Servi?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I would like to see American embassies be more proactive in this space, coordinating their messaging or maybe receiving messaging from Washington. I don't know exactly how it would look, but there are moments in the geopolitical calendar where there are real opportunities for the U.S. to push out a message that is positive about the United States. But there's traditionally been a reticence, or even in some cases I would describe it as almost an embarrassment in some cases, to take a really vigorous pro-American, unapologetic stance on the U.S., whereas the Russias and Irans and Chinas of the world have no problems at all doing that type of thing. They don't spend their time, worried about injustices from the past that they might have been involved in.
Africa, historically, sub-Saharan Africa, has been fundamental to the global prosperity of the advanced countries. Okay? And Africa had a role to play. It has a role as a raw material producer. We will not allow sub-Saharan Africa to escape that. Okay, we do everything to keep sub-Saharan Africa where it is, also impoverished. It's absolutely vital for the prosperity of everyone else. So let's get clear about that. Okay, and this means all the economic structures, all the global institutions, and the economics we teach everyone is all designed to keep Africa exactly where it is. And whether it is Europe or US, it's always the same. We need Africa to be impoverished because we need those raw materials and we need them dirt cheap. Okay, so that's the message. It doesn't mean to say that there's nothing Africans can do. Of course there is. Okay, but this is the opposition that they're fighting. This is what it's about. Because if Africa does do something different, I assure you living standards of all those in Europe and North America are going to fall. Okay? And that is a big price to pay. I assure you that the West is not going to allow that without a big fight. Okay, so this is what it's fundamentally about.
Good people, welcome back to the channel. It's my hope that you are doing good from wherever you're watching this video from. And today, I have some good news for you. Now, we are living the dream. We black people, we Africa, we are living that dream. Literally. This is exactly where our ancestors, the heroes of the struggle, envisaged of this continent of Africa and of black people. Because for the longest time, the imperialist, the oppressor, always wanted to make you black people and Africa look like you're not very important. You're not a key player in all the matters. You are, sub, you don't match up to the level. But I want to tell you that the heroes of the struggle for black people across the world had said it, that there will come a time when they can't hide it anymore, when they will come to the table and speak it out aloud and make it known that Africa and black people are a key player. they play a key role, indispensable in matters, in global matters, economics, global matters, politics, security, social, and much more. Now, when I say this is because they have been discussing about Africa behind our backs without our notice, day and night, on what they're going to do. This is because we all know that the West, led by America, has really been losing favor in Africa, while at the same time, corresponding or let's say opposing powers like China and Russia have been strengthening their ties in Africa, and now America is rattled, and have been having discussions on what to do about that. That is what I want us to discuss today, and we are going to watch this video and keenly. It's a very deep, interesting, thought-provoking video, and right at the end of this video, we shall have learned so much. Please stay tuned. Let's watch objectively and let's learn. So let's go for this one.
And today we're going to probe arguably one of the most difficult and frustrating places on the planet, and that is Africa, and specifically Eastern Africa. All of us here know that the United States has a clear national security and economic interest in the East and East Africa and the Horn of Africa region. The region borders key maritime trade routes through the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden and hosts a significant U.S. military presence at our base in Djibouti. The U.S. also conducts robust counterterrorism operations, largely focused on Somalia in partnership with Kenya and others in the region. But in recent years, violent conflicts in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Somalia have destabilized the region. These conflicts provide fertile ground for violent extremist groups like Al-Shabaab, ISIS, and the Houthis. They enable malign actors like China, Iran, and Russia, and devastate local populations and U.S. national security alike. Sudan in particular is a crisis too few Americans recognize as the world's deadliest ongoing conflict. The Sudanese people are enduring atrocities on a staggering scale: genocide in Darfur, mass displacement, and famine across multiple regions. Sudan is a hotbed of instability and a direct threat to U.S. national security interests. There are no good options or easy outcomes, but that only heightens the need for U.S. attention and leadership. Over the last 4 years, the U.S. reactions to this crisis and many others on the continent were fragmented, reactive, and ineffective. President Trump and this administration have already acted to better protect U.S. national security in the region. In President Trump's first term, his administration engaged in talks with Kenya over a potential free trade agreement, a first for sub-Saharan Africa. And now Secretary Rubio and other senior officials have ramped up engagement and confronted threats from al-Shabaab and the Islamic State head-on. But these efforts cannot be siloed. They must be part of a broad strategic effort to protect American interests in Africa while also protecting the U.S. taxpayer's pocketbook. That means being clear-eyed about our potential and existing partners in the region. In many cases, these governments are not wholly legitimate, which raises the question of whether engagement is worth the cost. Take, for example, South Sudan. Its government exists based on a peace agreement that its signatories routinely violate. The U.S. played a central role in the country's creation, a legacy that has carried a financial cost well above $10 billion in assistance since independence in 2011. Yet the returns on this investment in terms of securing sustainable peace and a functional state are marginal at best and arguably diminishing. Additionally, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda each face serious domestic challenges that severely limit what U.S. investment can do. This fact, unfortunately, demands our restraint. Many African nations maintain troubling ties with China, including key national security partners. Just last month, President Ruto declared that Kenya, a major non-NATO ally, and China are co-architects of a new world order. That's not just alignment to China, it's allegiance. I submit for the record the text of that speech. I'm going to enter it in the record at the conclusion of the hearing. that describes this. Relying on leaders who embrace Beijing so openly is an error. It's time to reassess our relationship with Kenya and others who forge tight bonds with China. And it isn't just an embracement of China, but also the, quote, new world order, end quote. Still, there are countries where meaningful engagement is possible, but only with sober judgment and clear-eyed realism. We must stop building U.S. policy in Africa around individual leaders and instead focus on strengthening institutions, expanding private sector ties, and empowering the region's young and dynamic populations. We hold this hearing at a moment of profound urgency, but also real opportunity. By tailoring our strategy and spending to align with the potential of our partners in the region, we can build stronger partnerships that serve both Africa and U.S. national interests, ultimately making America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. With that, I turn to our distinguished ranking member, Senator Sheehy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Like you, I'm delighted that we are able to hold this hearing today. I want to welcome our witnesses, and I think there's a lot of agreement on both sides of the aisle about the importance of Africa to the United States and the need to engage more there. The United States does have a critical role to play on the continent. Just last month, Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo signed a declaration of principles on ending a brutal 30-year war. It's not quite ended yet. However, it's a positive step, and it's the result of deliberate diplomatic work that's been carried out over many years on a bipartisan basis. Unfortunately, this administration's cuts to foreign aid programs have been very damaging when we look at what we need to do on the continent of Africa. While reports from the State Department indicate that life-saving aid continues to flow, what my staff that traveled to Africa 3 weeks ago saw on the ground was very different, and we have some pictures that they took from that trip. This is a clinic that was for an HIV/AIDS prevention site for girls in South Africa. Sadly, as you can see, it's been closed because all of the prevention activities around HIV/AIDS on the continent have been shut down. This is a photo also in South Africa of a clinic for vulnerable children, again, around addressing HIV/AIDS. It has also been shut down as the result of the stop in foreign assistance. This final picture is of a hospital in Angola where USAID used to provide ready-to-use therapeutic foods to address starvation and famine. And while there are still cans, those are formula, those are not the ready-to-use therapeutic foods. They're totally out of those. So I hope our witnesses today will talk about the impact that cuts to those life-saving aid programs have on the security not just of the people of Africa, but of the United States, because as we know, what happens there doesn't stay in Africa. We see the impact here in the United States. Rationing HIV drugs gives the virus a chance to mutate into drug-resistant strains. And I also hope you will talk about the competition for influence in Africa between the United States and China. The chairman mentioned that in his remarks. I think it's something that we're seeing. And this is a map that was done in 2023 that shows the influence of China in Africa. I wish we had the one that we had in the Armed Services Committee several years ago that compares China's impact in Africa to the United States, because they are eating our lunch there. And you can see the red is where the PRC has really put a focus on the countries in Africa. You can see the Chinese base in Djibouti. It shows the 2,000 military troops that are deployed in Africa by the Chinese, and 1,775 peacekeepers that support 4 UN peacekeeping operations, again, Chinese. So it is significant that we are not competing either militarily or diplomatically in Africa, and now on the foreign assistance front. One stark example of this is the Libido Corridor Project. It's a US-backed initiative that we've spent years developing and investing in. It would create a route for Central Africa's natural resources to flow east out to the Atlantic. Meanwhile, China has a competing railway project in Tanzania that would send these natural resources east out to the Indian Ocean. I think I said that wrong. It would send the resources west out to the Atlantic. It's in our interest and those of the people in the region for the United States to come out on top in these situations. One piece of legislation that has shown its value time and again is the Women, Peace and Security Act. This is legislation that passed with bipartisan support in both houses. It was signed into law by President Trump during his first term. Our armed forces have made great use of it, especially in AFRICOM. It gives us a real advantage over our Chinese competitors. And sadly, this is a program that Secretary Hegseth has decided to discontinue because he claims it's a DEI program, which is not. But where WPS authorities allow us to gather intelligence from women and families, we can counter violent extremism and we can advance our interests and deepen economic investment in East Africa and the Horn. So as you talk about the opportunities in the region, I hope you will lay out some of the economic and foreign policy tools we can use to achieve success. I look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Appreciate that. We have two very distinguished witnesses with us today. We're going to start by hearing from Mr. Joshua Meservey, who is a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, where he focuses on great power competition in Africa, African geopolitics, and counterterrorism. He was previously a research fellow for Africa at the Heritage Foundation, worked at the Atlantic Council's Africa Center for the U.S. Army Special Operations Command, and for Church World Service in Nairobi, Kenya. He is a returned Peace Corps volunteer who served in Zambia and extended his service there to work for the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Mr. Meservey holds a Master of Arts in Law and Diplomacy from the Fletcher School at Tufts University and a BA in History from the Templeton Honors College at Eastern University. Mr. Meservey, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen, and members of the committee, thank you for the honor of testifying today and for your attention to an important region of the world. My name is Joshua Meservey. I'm a senior fellow at Hudson Institute. My views are my own and do not represent an official position of Hudson. East Africa is important to the prosperity and safety of Americans. Because of its natural resources, large populations, and fast-growing economies, it has strong potential as a U.S. investment destination, a market for American goods, and for potential technological breakthroughs. The region's strategic importance is inescapable as well. It commands an important shipping choke point and lane through the Red Sea, which also has a dense concentration of submarine cables. It abuts Saudi Arabia and Yemen, and Djibouti hosts American, Chinese, and other military bases. As difficult as it already is, the security situation could easily worsen. Including Sudan, a conflict that is sowing instability, extracting an immense human toll, and providing opportunities for American competitors, the region could soon host 3 devastating wars if Ethiopia and Eritrea start fighting, and if South Sudan's leaders continue their brinksmanship. Meanwhile, Somalia's Islamist terrorist group al-Shabaab is retaking territory as the government in Mogadishu remains mired in corruption and dysfunction. In a bit of good news, for which the Trump administration deserves credit, the DRC-Rwanda détente is proceeding, though the progress is incomplete and reversible. Further instability will heighten the costs to the U.S. economy and the dangers to Americans in the region, and make it very hard for Washington to seize the opportunities there. Additionally, the U.S.'s primary geopolitical competitors, as well as friendlier but at times still challenging countries, are prioritizing the region. In Djibouti, China built a military base with a pier sufficient to host a Chinese aircraft carrier or nuclear submarine. By participating in anti-piracy patrols in the Gulf of Aden, its vessels have gained experience that could be used against Taiwan or in the South China Sea. Its companies are involved in ports and have built important government buildings throughout the region, and senior Chinese officials have visited over 100 times since 1963. Russia recently reached an agreement to put a logistics center in Port Sudan. This follows naval visits to Eritrea, a naval agreement with Ethiopia, and a flurry of high-level diplomatic visits between Moscow and East African countries. In 2023, Ebrahim Raisi became the first Iranian president to visit Africa in over a decade. He visited Uganda and Kenya. Tehran normalized relations with Sudan the same year and started the process with Somalia last year. Iranian weapons are currently helping the SAF and previously helped the Ethiopian government prevail in the Tigray War. Other outside powers are important as well. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the UAE have invested heavily in East Africa, made large loans to various countries, and involved themselves in different ways in the various conflicts. UAE has funneled so much materiel to the rapid support forces in Sudan that it is likely the only reason the RSF has been able to sustain the operational tempo it has. There are many ways for Washington to ensure Americans benefit from the opportunities in East Africa while protecting against the threats. These include the following. First, create an East Africa strategy that is integrated into a broader Africa and global strategy. Commercial engagement should be at the core of any such strategy. It is critical as well to quickly fill the senior Africa-focused positions at the State Department and NSC. Number two, conduct sober assessments of Washington's ability to positively influence democratic growth and proceed accordingly. For instance, state building in Somalia is a failed experiment, yet Washington hasn't pivoted from over a decade of trying the same thing over and over. Three, upgrade Washington's abilities to support African government and civic institutions and avoid over-reliance on personalities. And fourth and finally, develop a country-focused framework. Washington should concentrate its finite resources in countries that have a baseline level of competence, strategic importance, and willingness to work with the U.S. The situation in East Africa is difficult, yet vigorous and sustained U.S. diplomacy could avert the worst consequences for the U.S. and reap demonstrable benefits for Americans. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for those thoughtful comments, Mr. Missouri. We're going to turn now to Ambassador Michelle Gavin. She's the Ralph Bunche Senior Fellow for Africa Policy Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. She served as U.S. Ambassador to Botswana and the U.S. Representative to the Southern African Development Community from 2011 to 2014. Prior to that, she was a Special Assistant to President Obama and the Senior Director for Africa at the National Security Council, where she led major policy reviews of Sudan and Somalia. She also previously served as Managing Director of the African Center in New York, was an International Affairs Fellow and Adjunct Fellow for Africa at the Council on Foreign Relations. Earlier in her career, she worked in the U.S. Senate, where she was the Staff Director for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee's Subcommittee on African Affairs. Certainly a distinguished position. She was Director of International Policy Issues for Senator Russ Feingold and Legislative Director for Senator Ken Salazar. Ms. Gavin received an Master's in Philosophy and International Relations from Oxford University, where she was a Rhodes Scholar, and earned her BA from Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. Ambassador Gavin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Shaheen, distinguished members of the committee. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to appear before you and discuss the very complex and challenging set of issues the U.S. confronts. I also really want to thank the staff. I do know from personal experience how much work goes into preparing for these hearings.
I bet you do.
And I'm grateful for that as well. Obviously, the role of Congress in Africa policy has a really long history. It's often been an oasis of bipartisan cooperation. It's one reason I enjoyed working on it for so long. And there are sort of numerous historical examples of Congress really elevating issues that sometimes a busy executive branch is perhaps neglecting. So Of course, as has been discussed, the forces pulling the Horn of Africa apart are gaining strength. There are very real, imminent threats to stability in several other East African countries. Nothing is more searing than Sudan's shockingly destructive war, which shows no sign of ending. The recent wave of drone attacks on Port Sudan, along with the RSF's sustained pressure on El Fasher, confirm that it is indeed possible for this terrible situation, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, to get even worse. And famine, on a scale the world has not seen in decades, remains not just a possibility but a likelihood. We have multiple civil conflicts persisting in Ethiopia, and Prime Minister Abiy's ambition to regain a presence on the Red Sea has raised tensions with Ethiopia's neighbors. Of course, my colleague is absolutely right. Somalia continues to struggle for a modicum of effective governance while battling al-Qaeda's largest global affiliate, al-Shabaab, and dealing with a chapter of the Islamic State. So China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Turkey, Iran, all of these states are active in the region. Many are very clearly thinking about their relationships in the Horn of Africa through a long-term strategic lens. They're investing in influence. And because their interests do not always align, they're sometimes engaging in proxy conflict. And we see this very clearly in Sudan. It's frankly less clear that the United States has a strategic vision for its relationship with the region. Long-standing problems of understaffed embassies and insufficient prioritization of African issues have joined the immediate shock of these very abrupt changes in foreign assistance and international humanitarian aid delivery to make it very easy for adversaries to paint the United States as uninterested and unreliable. Other anti-American messages capitalize on the fact the U.S. has been the most powerful country in the world throughout the post-Cold War era, and they tend to paint Washington as the enforcer of a painful, unjust status quo, which is one reason there's enthusiasm for BRICS in the region, and one reason I'm concerned about the cuts to Voice of America, which has provided some alternative perspectives on global issues. So this widespread perception of disengagement exists despite the fact that the United States, as you rightly noted, has very clear vital interests in this part of the world, not least the free flow of commerce through the Red Sea and combating terrorist organizations with very well-documented intent and, in many cases, experience, track records of doing so, of harming Americans. So part of the problem is uncertainty about just what the U.S. wishes to see in the region, what kind of East Africa is in the U.S. interest. Right? We would certainly benefit from a region at peace with capable governments that can be partners in addressing existing and emerging threats. We would benefit from a region with growing economies that can become trading partners, attractive investment destinations, potential collaborators in new enterprises. And we would benefit from a region, vitally, that is not beholden to U.S. adversaries or mortgaged to deep-pocketed external actors whose interests do not always align with ours. And so to pursue this vision, the United States needs to prioritize conflict resolution and conflict prevention. If these seem expensive, I think we've seen through this exercise with the Houthis in Yemen that it's far more expensive to actually have to turn to military action to protect our interests. The United States should avoid, I agree, an over-reliance on personal relationships with any specific regional leaders. Of course, the United States cannot simply impose its will on other states, but there can be no delegating responsibility for pursuing U.S. interests to any partner, not in East Africa and not in the Gulf. And finally, the United States needs to develop and pursue a Red Sea regional strategy, not a set of a la carte deals that transcends our own bureaucratic divisions that put Africa in one basket and the Middle East in another. For several years, I've served with other former U.S. officials on the U.S. Institute of Peace's Red Sea Study Group, which has advocated for this kind of more comprehensive approach to the region. A successful new security architecture would have to take all relevant equities into account. Thank you so much again for the opportunity. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Ambassador. We're now going to go through a 5-minute question round, 5 minutes each, to each of the senators who wish to participate. And I'm going to start. And I have to tell you that the watching President Ruhudo with the Chinese holding hands and talking about a new world order is just stunning. After all the work and effort we've put in there, and to see him talking about a new world order, you know, the new world order was constructed by the United States and democracies, capitalist countries that are human rights loving countries, and the new world order that these countries are talking about is being constructed by the autocracies, the outright communists, socialists, people who have no respect for human rights. It's stunning to hear countries talk about wanting to join or promote that world order when the world order that was constructed after World War II has served us so really well. Certainly not perfectly, but then again, the world isn't a perfect place, but so much better than what you'd see if the autocrats took over. It's discouraging to hear that, and part of it, I think, is tied to the fact that when we do things in Africa, they seem to be individual-centric instead of a country-centric. We don't focus on institution, we focus on individuals. And I don't know why it seems to be more prevalent in this part of the world than others. So if each you could take a quick run at a very complex question. So why don't you start?
Thank you, Chairman. I agree. President Ruto's comments were discouraging. They're not also out of the ordinary for the types of comments that Afghan leaders make, especially when they travel to Beijing, unfortunately. This is a challenge for the United States. I would suggest that Afghan leaders haven't always thoroughly thought through the consequences of this different type of world order, especially smaller countries that are smaller military or economic powers. The type of world order that China, Russia, Iran are advocating for would mean that they would be victimized probably in many ways. The grievances that Afghan leaders often express are focused on a few key issues, and then I think these larger powers like China, like Russia, like Iran, have co-opted those issues into their broader agenda to confront the United States. I think the U.S. Should make it clear to Afghan leaders that while, of course, they're welcome to have normal relations with these countries, especially if you're a major non-NATO ally, there are certain responsibilities associated with that. And I think the U.S. needs to be much more aggressive in its messaging, frankly, to Afghan publics and to Afghan leadership about the benefits that you laid out of the world order that the United States has underpinned for decades now.
I appreciate that. And I think you hit on something that probably deserves more thought and more attention, and that is the fact that this is the kind of thing that they're used to. And the reason they're used to it is they see it all over the continent, and they don't have the cadre of people that study in the United States like most other continents do, really. I mean, China, for example, has got hundreds of thousands of students studying here, and Europeans are notorious for having lots of people here. So they're exposed to a different type of government, I think. Ambassador, your thoughts?
Thank you. That's such an interesting last point. I couldn't agree more that bringing more African students to the U.S. Would absolutely be in U.S. interest. We've seen time and again how it can pay dividends down the line, although it's very difficult, actually, for a lot of Africans to come do university and graduate studies here right now.
And the thing that strikes me, too, is when we deal with leaders, as all of us do, from all over the planet, it always amazes me how how good their English is, most of them. And you ask them why, and they studied here in the United States. People who are coming up through those other countries are sent by their parents or their government or something to study here. And the result is they take home the view of how important human rights are and how important democracy is. I'm sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, I agree with you completely. I do think there's kind of an inflection point in many parts of the continent right now, because you have these very young populations that are now urbanizing, digitally connected. There's a lot more political volatility. And so part of what I think is happening is a demand-driven desire for an international order that takes African equities into account, the sort of awareness that the Bretton Woods institutions were created right before most African countries were independent. And then that is capitalized on by US adversaries, right, to distort the message to the U.S. wishes to keep African populations in poverty, or that's more or less the thrust of it. There's also the fact that, money talks. And for a lot of these African leaders, they're dealing with tremendously constrained fiscal space. They have big debt burdens. And the way the U.S. Provides assistance in ways that we can be accountable to the American taxpayers, it's a little bit different dealing with the Chinese or with some of these Gulf actors who've been gaining influence. And so the last thing I would say is that I couldn't agree more that it's really important to keep an eye on the internal dynamics in these countries for the U.S. to understand and have strong contacts and relationships with actors outside of government, because leadership changes are going to happen, and these investments in these one-to-one personal elite relationships will not serve our interests. They'll have a sell-by date and will be left in the cold.
Well, appreciate that, and appreciate the remark you made about the fact that money talks, and we wind up with that all over. It's hard to explain to people that there's a real difference between capitalism and socialism. Where the government owns the capital and owns all the money, it's easy for them to spread it out in other countries as they deem appropriate, whereas in capitalism, you need the profit motive and the free market system to back you up. With that, Senator Shaheen.
Thank you. You both mentioned messaging, and Gavin, you mentioned concerns that we are shutting down Voice of America and other information ways that we can message into places like the Horn of Africa. Can you talk about what we lose when we do that? And I'm going to ask both of you this question because we had a hearing in this committee at the beginning of the year, and one of the things that one of the witnesses told us is that the PRC is spending over $1 billion a year just on misinformation and disinformation campaigns. Much of that obviously is going into Africa. So what's the impact of that, and what's our alternative if we shut down all of our organizations that allow us to correct inaccurate facts, to correct the misinformation campaigns that the PRC and Russia and other adversaries are doing? You want to begin? Sure.
I think it's actually incredibly important because it's not just the PRC. You're absolutely right. They've made massive investments in media on the continent, including hiring local reporters who then are delivering state-approved messages and slants on the news. I think that the U.S. has a role to play both in supporting independent media in this part of the world, investigative journalism. This is how one has accountability and more connectivity, right, between populations and their leadership. And I think when we are absent, it is, again, just incredibly easy to caricature the U.S. as uninterested or worse, having some kind of malign interest in the region. And I've been looking at African social media discussions pretty intently for several years as part of a book project. And, the Russians, they too have their own influence campaigns that are very, very popular. And the messages are, you can see why the messages would be appealing. The messages are about respect for African lives and sovereignty. They're about addressing the frustration that African countries are rich in resources and yet people can't find jobs. Having an absence of both straight reporting and clear messaging about what the U.S. is trying to achieve, there's then just a vacuum. And there we are with adversaries quite busily filling it.
Thank you. Mr. Servi?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, I would like to see American embassies be more proactive in this space, coordinating their messaging or maybe receiving messaging from Washington. I don't know exactly how it would look, but there are moments in the geopolitical calendar where there are real opportunities for the U.S. to push out a message that is positive about the United States. But there's traditionally been a reticence, or even in some cases I would describe it as almost an embarrassment in some cases, to take a really vigorous pro-American, unapologetic stance on the U.S., whereas the Russias and Irans and Chinas of the world have no problems at all doing that type of thing. They don't spend their time, worried about injustices from the past that they might have been involved in. So I think that's one area. Another area that always frustrated me was we had these extraordinary programs, PEPFAR being one of them, that literally saved tens of millions of African lives.
Past tense.
I'm hopeful that there will be elements of that continuing, but I understand that's an ongoing process. But as far as I could tell, we got very little credit for that. And now that's not the only reason to do something, but because this program was funded by American taxpayers, it should have redounded to American taxpayer credit. But the U.S. was just very bad about reminding people of the extraordinary benefits that came from American public health interventions. It was very bad about tooting its own horn, let's say. So I think we need to move away from that reticence and, again, be much more coordinated and even aggressive in touting the American model and demonstrating our track record.
And I certainly agree with that in terms of being very clear about what we're providing to help in countries. I think the sad thing at this point is we don't have those programs anymore because they're gone. They just got eliminated. And so how do we do that? And how do we do that? I agree with you on the embassies. I think our embassies ought to be very positive about the United States and what we offer to countries. But without an apparatus to get that messaging out, it's going to be really hard to do that, especially when we're up against over $1 billion from the PRC in providing that kind of information. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. Good point, both of you, on the fact that we didn't get any credit for PEPFAR. I think probably the reason for that was we didn't do this to get credit. We did this to actually make a difference, and we made a difference. And I think we'll continue to do so as we go through these programs. But I think that's probably a lesson for us, that when you do good, you ought to at least give yourself credit for doing good. And we just did the good and didn't take any credit for it. So, Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A lot of attention has been given to the Houthi attacks in the Red Sea and its impact on global shipping. However, there's a deeper, more strategic, critical problem developing here with regard to the Houthis funding from Iran, and they're moving into Somalia and establishing relationship ties with al-Shabaab and the Islamic State's Somalia. And this is something that I think is very challenging for the United States. During the first Trump administration, Trump's maximum pressure effort brought Iran's foreign reserves down from over $122.5 billion to under $14 billion. And I'm pleased to see that the Trump administration is again putting maximum pressure on Iran to cut off the flow of money from Iran to terrorist groups like the Houthis. I think that needs to happen to be able to make sure we're putting pressure on them. We also need to get the snapback sanctions on Iran as well. But this growing pipeline of drones, munitions, and military expertise risks turning the Horn of Africa into an extension of Iran's proxy network. If left unchecked, this could destabilize the region, the shipping lanes, embolden the Islamic insurgents, and create a multi-front threat to the U.S. and our interests in the Horn of Africa. Mr. Mercerve, how urgent is this risk that the Houthis are moving into Somalia? Is this a long-term problem? Can you talk a little bit about what you see right now and how urgent that is?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, for the question. As you laid out, it is a very real problem. The Kenyans would say it's maybe their primary national security threat is the prospect of al-Shabaab getting advanced drones, for instance, from the Houthis, or just getting more advanced capabilities. There's a long history of al-Shabaab receiving help from AQAP, which was al-Qaeda's affiliate in Yemen. So those routes are well established, and there's also people constantly moving back and forth. So it's highly plausible, even though the Houthis are a Shia operation and al-Shabaab is a Sunni one. They can be quite ecumenical when they're focused on attacking the United States or other adversaries. So yeah, it's a very serious concern. I haven't seen in the open source any sort of definitive account of exactly what the exchanges look like. But certainly if it starts to include things like drones or even capabilities around IEDs, then that would be a massive problem, both within Somalia, but also including neighboring states like Kenya, like Ethiopia, potentially even Djibouti.
What should the U.S. Congress do to help be preventive to make sure that the Horn of Africa doesn't become the next step in Iran's proxy network against us?
I think you referenced this maximum pressure campaign. I think Congress should do all that it can to assist such a campaign and remind the administration that the problem extends far beyond Iran, far beyond the Middle East. It also extends into places like Africa. The Houthi al-Shabaab links are not the only Iranian presence on the continent. There's a long history of Hezbollah receiving funding, especially from West Africa, but actually all across the continent. Shia proselytization and other Iranian activity. I referenced some of the increased recent Iranian activity in my remarks. So Africa should absolutely be part of this maximum pressure campaign, and I think Congress can help the administration do that.
Now, I'm running out of time here, so I want to just switch a little bit to talk about Communist China and their influence on Africa, which we've already discussed a little bit. But one of the things that Communist China is doing is establish a training school in Tanzania. And essentially what they're doing is training the people who are interested in politics about authoritarianism, as the chairman was pointing out, and really working against multi-party democracy. What, again, should we as the U.S. Congress be doing to help push back on what Communist China is doing in East Africa with regard to how they're trying to undermine the democracies there?
So yes, it's China has a whole of government, to use that cliche approach, to undermining democratic norms on the continent. They're very pragmatic. They'll work with any type of government, but they are quite explicitly pushing their own model and saying, look, you can enjoy economic prosperity as well as centralized power, even authoritarian power. So regarding the training school that you referenced, this is the CCP has long links to the liberation movements in Southern Africa, especially, and there are constant trainings ongoing between CCP and liberation movement cadres in ANC in South Africa. Their entire NEC, their governing council, has been trained in China. So I think the U.S. Needs to try a variety of approaches. One, again, it needs to unabashedly make the case for democracy, free markets, et cetera. I think it should hearken back to the history the United States has of partnering with countries like Japan, like South Korea, for instance, Germany after World War II, and demonstrate that with strong American partnership, you can really achieve significant gains. I think it should focus heavily on supporting civil society organizations, which are oftentimes the best check on overweening government power. et cetera.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may just have it, can I allow Ambassador Gavin to maybe weigh in on that last question real briefly? Is that okay?
Generous as the chairman is.
You are so generous. Thank you. Ambassador Gavin, could you just quickly, again, just kind of highlight, and don't repeat what Mr. Meservey said, but anything else you'd observe?
Yes, I think that this relationship between the CCP and these dominant ruling parties on the continent is actually ultimately going to be a disadvantage for China, because the sort of discourse about why these ruling parties should be in charge tends to link back to liberation, and most African societies skew very young. These are populations that don't remember pre-liberation days and are wondering what their government has done for them lately. So I think, continuing to hold, it would be nice to restore some of the democracy and governance work that the U.S. did, NDI and IRI, that help really draw a clear line between party and state, which is also important for combating corruption, which, if you look at Afrobarometer polling, is at the very top of African priority lists. So we can align ourselves with these populations that way.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Coons.
Thank you very much, Chairman Risch, Ranking Member Shaheen, for this important full committee hearing, and to the Ambassador and to Mr. Meservey, thank you for your testimony. What I hear from both of you is more engagement, not less. More of what we have done that works, and that the abrupt and chaotic closure of a very wide range of our most effective tools for engaging with Africa, from the MCC to YALI to the PEPFAR program, puts all of this at risk. Mr. Chairman, if I might, given your opening comments in the exchange, I'd love to work with you on clarifying the U.S.-Kenya relationship. Their foreign minister and national security advisor were just here last week meeting with the president and folks at the White House, and I agree with you that some of those statements with the PRC are very concerning, given the deep and long relationship and the security relationship we have with regards to al-Shabaab in Somalia.
It's disappointing, to say the least.
You referenced how important it is that there be more students from Africa coming to the United States. Well, I've got a solution for you. It's a 15-year-old program called the Young African Leaders Initiative that has sent 20,000 vetted, promising African students to the United States. The University of Delaware happens to be one of the 20 hosting universities at a very modest cost that is about to be shut down. Not a good idea. It brings promising young African leaders to the United States for a summer to meet with businesses and entrepreneurs, to meet with civil society, to convene in Washington, and then go to 20 different states all over the country. One of many things I don't think we should shut down. To the point you just made, Ambassador Gavin, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, MCC, launched under President Bush, explicitly used corruption and combating corruption, reducing corruption, as one of the key indicators for whether or not a country would get a long-term development partnership with the United States. It is all but closed. Most of its staff have been laid off. Many of its compacts have been shut down. PEPFAR, Mr. Meservey, is all but closed. It has been trimmed dramatically from its scope. A 25-year-old program, long deserving of bipartisan support. I'd just be interested in both of you briefly saying, what does it do to our reputation on a continent of 54 countries, a continent with enormous human potential and natural resources, a country that China and Russia see as the continent of the 21st century? What's it do to our place in East Africa and across the continent if we abruptly shut down these long-standing, demonstrated, and effective programs? Madam Ambassador, and then Mr. Meservey.
Thank you, Senator. It is incredibly self-defeating, is my view. I just don't understand why we are taking a bunch of tools in our foreign policy toolbox and tossing them into a dumpster.
I think the term was a wood chipper.
Okay, I suppose so.
It's tougher to reassemble things that have been put through a wood chipper than things that have gone through a reasoned, considerable review, which is the process that we should have gone through, is to have this body, Congress, work with the new administration to say, okay, trim this, reform this, change this, shutter this, expand this. Yeah. That's not what happened.
No, it's not. And not only have we lit our credibility on fire, and you see particularly China making hay of this. The favorite phrase now is reliable partner. China's a reliable partner. They're not going to abruptly pull the rug out from under you. And I think that, some of the kind of knock-on effects, consider the tens of thousands of health workers in Kenya who are out of work now. These are educated, engaged citizens, and the messaging we want to do about this long relationship with Kenya, it's at odds with their lived experience now. And
I'm about out of time. I've got less than a minute.
Sorry.
Mr. Meservey, if I might. I do agree that a bright spot is the hard work done under the previous administration by Avril Haines in DRC, Rwanda, and it's continuing under Special Advisor Boulos. There's a real chance of peace there. I can't think of a more concentrated example of the PRC-U.S. competition than the two adjacent bases in Djibouti. I've just introduced with Senator Ricketts a bill to try and prioritize focusing on denying the PRC more basing opportunities on the continent. What do you think we ought to make a priority in doing that important work?
Yeah, thank you, Senator, and I'm very pleased to hear about the bill and your attention to this problem. I would especially highlight the danger of an Atlantic Ocean base. We know quite reliably that China has been pursuing such a base for years. It's not hard to see how problematic that would be for security of the American homeland. So I think I mentioned in my original remarks that commercial engagement should be at the heart of a strategy. And I think we need to start giving African countries more of what they want and less of what they don't. That seems like an obvious proposition, but frequently our Africa strategy doesn't seem to be guided by that principle. So the existential crisis that every African government faces is youth unemployment. Yep. And our development assistance and humanitarian assistance, as useful as that is in some contexts, is not going to address those problems. So I think
I do think that the Development Finance Corporation and the MCC really focused on private sector partnerships that fuel growth from the bottom up. I think to the extent we can focus our messaging, our investments, and our partnerships on combating corruption, on being a secure and reliable partner, and on helping create reliable, high-growth jobs, this continent of 4 billion people by the end of this century is a place where we can win in the competition with China. And if we don't, if we continue our retreat, we won't. Thank you both.
agreed.
Thank you, Senator Coons. Senator Cornyn.
Thank you for being here. I think we all agree that Africa is an important place, and that we are not doing everything that we should do or might do in order to influence the direction of that continent. I do take exception to some of my colleagues' statements about the previous, let's say, the status quo ante, with a lot of money being spent in disjointed, wasteful, and unfocused ways by the federal government. And obviously changing that is disruptive, and there's a lot of programs that I think, particularly PEPFAR, which have been particularly important in Africa in terms of our soft power and saving lives. And so I continue obviously to support that. But it seems to me we lack a coherent strategy. And I'm not sure that, I know the administration is working on some targeted projects, for example, the DRC on the critical minerals front and others. But my visit to Kenya, Angola, and the DRC last August, I was struck just by not only the magnitude of the challenge, but how we seem to lack any particular strategy to deal with making it any different than it is now. So maybe both of you, take it in turn, please. What would be a successful regional strategy in East Africa look like for the United States? That doesn't necessarily have to all emanate from the White House. Congress can begin that conversation. What would that look like?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I think it's important first to ensure that any regional strategy is integrated into a broader continental strategy and then global strategy. But as far as the region specifically, the U.S. needs to determine exactly what its interests are, what its goals are, and how it can get there. That all seems obvious.
That
but
seems pretty fundamental.
yeah,
I
but
mean,
sometimes
one of the things where our goal would be to stop the Russians and the Chinese from essentially preempting us and pushing us out in terms of our influence. But go ahead.
Yes, absolutely. So I referenced the potential Russian base really in Port Sudan. That would be massively problematic. We already have the Chinese base in Djibouti, as we've discussed. So I think, again, I'm a big believer in commercial engagement. I think the U.S. government and the U.S. Congress can help streamline the work of organizations like the DFC and Exim Bank, make them more fit for purpose. They're too slow, they're too bureaucratic. And then make that really this commercial engagement the centerpiece of the value proposition that the United States brings to these countries. I also think it should determine which countries it can actually achieve things with. There are just some some governments on the continent that are so hostile and so frankly inept that it's very hard to determine how the U.S. could ever actually achieve much of anything with them. I would, some specific areas you could talk about critical minerals. EAC does have such things. I know that critical minerals is already a cliche to talk about, but it is a reality for the United States, and Africa will have to be
It's not just a cliche, right?
Yeah, it's a real thing. There's a reason everybody talks about it. So Africa will have to be part of the solution for the United States. The U.S. needs to figure out how to support its companies. It should work with the companies of allied countries, because we have very few mining companies anymore in this country. So, but the Australians, the Canadians, they have huge mining companies and look for possibilities there. They should also work closely with other allied countries on financing arrangements and take a much more systematic and harmonized approach with allies to these regions to focus on the core interests of the United States, which again would be security and then some of these economic issues.
Ambassador?
Thank you. I think, particularly for the Horn, it is really important to integrate what we're trying to accomplish in Africa with a strategy that looks at the other side of the Red Sea. So this is broadly, what we need to do is stop treating Africa like an extra credit project in foreign policy and make it part of the core curriculum and integrate it into the way we think about achieving U.S. interests globally. And I think that, more engagement, as Senator Coons said, a focus on peace and conflict prevention, because the conflicts in Africa provide opportunities, particularly to Russia and to various criminal networks, terrorist and otherwise, that this is not in our interest. Commercial deals, yes, but making sure that deals don't just benefit a set of elites at the top, but are deals that we can talk about benefiting both sides of the Atlantic in a way that addresses some of these job creation issues.
Welcome back. You know what I find great about this is they are having a hard time discussing about us, in fact, in our very absence, because it seems the US have been rattled, especially, and they have been awoken up from their deep slumber, and now they have quickly gone back to the drawing board because it is the only way out. Yes, they have pretended for so long to make Africa look like it's not important, but now clearly you can see what they are doing. They are having a strong, deep discussion about Africa, because Africa is inevitably, the key player. Now, the point of discussion here is the rise of the new world order, which evidently and inevitably has now taken place now, and it is threatening their very paternalistic existence, especially towards the global south, towards Africa. Now, there are a few points I have noted along this discussion. And first of all, they called the Africa-China relationship a troubling one. Do you notice? Did you hear that they called it a troubling one? Troubling to who? It's not troubling Africa. It's not a trouble to Africa. It's not a trouble to Kenya as a country in Africa. No, because we are forging our own relations depending, I mean, yeah, depending on where we find our interest being taken care of. Because everybody out here in this jungle has to fend for themselves. So when they call it troubling, understand that it is troubling to them, because obviously and evidently we have noticed, they also have noticed, their quickly diminishing influence in Africa, and this is at the expense of the growing influence of, say, a country like China, who they regard as their direct foe. Then another thing is, so now they want to assess their ties with African countries, especially my country, Kenya. They have mentioned in this very episode so many times. And when they mention about Kenya, it's just like any other particular different country in Africa, when who have different kind of relationships with other different countries that they deem not their friends, not their allies, or their opposition. Now they want to check on that, and when they say to assess, they need to assess that situation real quick, because it is to their benefit, not that we are going to lose anything. I mean, we already lost it all, and that is why we decided a new friendship is far more beneficial, and we are thinking of other ways from which we can benefit ourselves, from which the relationship is going to be one of mutual benefit. So the earlier they assess that, then the earlier they can benefit from the situation. We are not bound to lose anything. We have been losing it all, so they are bound to lose it if they don't assess. So we're not scared. We're not worried about them saying to assess. They can go ahead and assess. And then they have also acknowledged the importance of Africa in the prosperity of the US. You can imagine how much pillaging the West, the Europe and America has done in and on African soil without any benefit for Africa. And now that there is a new generation of Africa that has woken up, and Africa will never again be pillaged and be exploited on the basis of misinformation and propaganda, because people are awoke, people are knowledgeable, and now this acknowledgement of the importance of Africa just says it all. Will say it all. Now, the only reason why Africa is moving towards aligning itself with the East, because of the black consciousness around the world, in which now people have seen the truth, and people are now considering where their interest, our interest as black people, as Africa, um, where our interest lies, and where our potential can really continue to grow. Now, and they also want the US to assess their impact on African soil, especially juxtaposed with the Chinese impact. And I can tell them for sure that even before they do the assess, everybody knows the truth. The impact, economical impact China has in Africa is massive. In fact, is really hard to match by now. If they are waking up at this time, what China has been doing in Africa is just so much. They have pumped a lot economically into the infrastructure of different parts in different African countries. It will take them some time, a good amount of time, for them to even match that, let alone surpass. So they better wake up and act quickly. And okay, they are also concerned. They are obviously concerned with the two-way beneficial, relationship, the symbiotic, the mutualism between the U.S. and Africa. Why are they concerned about this? Because for the longest time, Europe and America have exploited and looted Africa. And the point here is they have benefited at the expense of Africa. Africa has not been benefiting from her own natural human resources. But now there comes other players in the game who are willing to give so they can take. And now what happens? They have to go back to the drawing board and see what they can do about that. Again, I want to remind them that it's upon them, but the earlier they do it, the better for them. And they are worried about their growing irrelevance, of course, in the continent of Africa, especially at the expense of the very growing influence of countries like China, Russia, Turkey, and all across in these you have had China, Russia, Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and many other different countries across the world. Why? Because everybody is eyeing at having a piece of what Africa can give. Now, why is everybody so much concerned and worried and attempting to get something from Africa? Because Africa is literally the richest continent on earth. Despite it having the poorest people, it is because it is by design, and the design that was set by that old the old world order. Now, of a paternalistic, patronizing relationship where they looted, we didn't get anything, they got it all. They developed at our own expense, at our own underdevelopment. They pillaged, they stole, and they did everything that we know historically. And now the world is changing. There is a lot of consciousness. Africa is rising. Everybody knows the truth. Everybody is challenging the myths. Everybody is coming to fight imperialism. And so their influence is quickly diminishing in the continent of Africa. While Africa has it's generally aligning with the force of the opponents of the West, America and Europe. It's not that Africa has you know mm, any other kind of ties with Russia or China. No, the only reason is mutualism, is a symbiotic relationship. What do we get from this relationship, and what do we get from that other? The one that you gain more is the one you opt for, obviously. So everybody is eyeing to have a piece of Africa, and they have done this before. That is how they managed to divide, rule, and just do everything that they did to Africa. But now there is an awoke Africa that understands what's going on. And while nobody really has Africa's interest at their heart, but Africa will have her own interest, we must have our own interest at our heart, and we will always bring it to the table. Anytime there is a discussion, we must always bring our interest to the table. This is what we want served, and when you serve this, if you can serve this, and then we will serve you what you need. And that is the only way, and that is how probably China and Russia have been having their influence continuously grow, because they have to give to take, while the traditional Western world just knew how to take without giving. All along, we have not been players. We have not been key players when it comes to that table of discussion. But now they need us there. They are calling for more Africans, more students to go to the United States. Why? but all of a sudden they never wanted Africans. They wanted to keep their purity because, in the words of Dr. Umar Johnson, if you want to control the world politically, the power in the world, then you have to have a good hold of Africa. So in Africa is where exactly where the power lies. Now, this wasn't the full discussion in that Senate, but I cut it short at this point because I'm working on the second episode. Please stay tuned as we work on the second episode, which is dropping very soon. But meanwhile, you can go ahead and share your thoughts about what you have learned, about what you think about these in the comment section below, and share this video. Please also, I'd kindly ask you to support this channel, and there are many ways you can do, but the easiest and free way you can support this channel is by subscribing to this channel if you haven't subscribed just yet. You can also join our membership and you can send us a super thanks. So until the next episode, I will be happy to see you in my next video. Peace out.